everyone, and welcome to the Chinbeard Art Series. We're going to get started here. Today's episode, we're looking at doing some concept work for the logo treatment for Legend Brewing, which is a fictional brewing company inside my Legend of Nilou graphic novel series. So as you can see, we're starting to concept out some work here. I'm using an AI artwork piece of Nilou from Genshin Impact for the base pose. I really like this pose. I like the whole hydro feel to it. I think it looks really, really good. So as you can see, we're blocking out some of the major points, marking joints, doing basic blocking, getting some form down, and just the overall feel of what the character is going to look like. We may or may not use the entire full body, but the overall pose is definitely what I'm going for. Okay, as you can see, I'm adding some notes here as I'm drawing. I highly encourage you to do the same. So as you're concepting out your work, make little notes here about areas to fix, to look at and reform, maybe even make it a little bit more of your art style. Just mark it up. This isn't supposed to be pretty. This is your blocking and your initial form, discovery. So even if you're using references or not, don't think that just because you're doing a single pass or a first pass here, that it needs to look stellar. It doesn't. It doesn't matter what level of artist you are. Notes are good. I have no problem with notes. I have no problem with making little sections on your art piece to give you an idea on where the form is, how the form works. As you can see, as an example, on this particular sketch, as I'm blocking out my character Adriana, I'm marking how the lines will move around her arm, or showing the depth and the angle of what this form represents. I'm doing very basic blocking stuff here around the beer mug. The idea is to have since this is for a brewery, I wanted to have the beer coming out of her mug here in a splash pattern very similar to how Nilou is shown back here. So it's a fun little play, and it might take you a time or two to get the look just right. As you can see here, I didn't like the way I was going with the mug. It wasn't working right. I didn't like the direction she was holding it, so I'm changing it. Feel free to do that with your own work. Okay, we've got a basic form down here. I think she looks really good. This is a short character. I made her, had to go back and readjust her torso and just adjust some fine details before we start getting into the actual refined sketch, which is what we're working on now. So we're adding some details now that we got the form down. We're adding details like what's her expression going to look like, where's the shading going to be. We're putting in a second little sketch over the blocking to clean it up, get it ready for inking. This is just a process that I've adapted over time. Your process might be a little different, but being able to do artwork directly on an iPad and do digital work without having to draw on paper and then scan it in, this has made life for me a whole lot easier. I came from a time where when you wanted to draw, you got out your sketch pad and you started drawing. So it kind of dates me a little bit, but I love using multiple layers. I love having reference layers that show me, hey, I want to go back and redo this artwork. What was I thinking at the time, and how can I make it better? So right now we're going over Adri. We're detailing out things like, I'm looking at defining out her legs, how her legs work. looking for a particular cutoff. Since this is a logo, it's meant to be like a bug, so you can use it pretty much anywhere. So I don't want to use the entire full body. So I'm looking for a spot here where I can cut her off and make it a self-contained image that I can just pretty much put on anything and it'll work. This is my graphic designer part coming out in me, my branding, professionalism kind of coming out, and this is how I do like a lot of logo treatments. So I've done plenty in the past, and then I'm looking at this going, okay, where can I stop? Where's the logical spot here? And I just thought having the beer wrap around her legs like this, I thought it looked really cute. So now we're adding some hair, getting her into more of a character. You know, this is a character I've had for a long time. She's my mascot. I love using her in different projects, and so I'm starting to define some of her features. Okay, we're starting to add some more details here. As we get into it, we're adding things like, some action here in her bust line. I really enjoy drawing female characters. I think they're a lot more fun than male characters for some obvious reasons. But I want to make it look comical, but not like ridiculous. So I try not to make it look 100% unrealistic like some artists, but I'm not gonna dog them for drawing what they want and what they like. To be honest with you, I respect anyone who will take the time to actually draw something rather than have AI spit it out for you. So I don't mind using AI for a reference tool, kind of like what we did earlier for Nilou, but at this point I don't need that AI artwork to continue. I already know what she's going to look like. I already know what she's going to wear. That kind of stuff's already been concepted out, and so now I'm just going for it. And sometimes it takes a little bit, and sometimes it doesn't look as detailed and as realistic as you might like, but it has character. It has a lot of character, and I have a lot of respect for artists that'll do their own work. So in this pose, you can kind of see that she's almost in the middle of a jump, or she's raising up her hand, and she's or possibly swinging her beer mug here, and it's got a big splash around her. So there's motion going on. It's exciting. Her body's gonna obviously react to that. Her chest is jumping up into her neck. It just shows a lot of action. Her expression is fun and interesting. She's having a good time, and that's the kind of expression I wanted to note. Okay, so as you can see, we're getting into the inking part of this project. To be honest, this is my favorite part. I love the inking aspect of the art pieces, where you really start seeing the defined look. You have to look beyond all the sketching, all the random pencil marks, all the notes, and now you're starting to create something that is sharp and it's professional, and you can take your time with this and make it look the absolute best you possibly can. Once you pull away the sketches behind the ink, it every single time it floors me on how clean it is. And so as you can see here, I'm using the Bezier tool in order to get her hair right. I did plenty of hand sketching her hair earlier, but this is the ink part, so I want it looking sharp and interesting. And it's okay to use the tools available to you. I'm using Clip Studio Paint. It has a lot of tools available, and just go ahead and use it. It's okay. It's okay. Use tools to assist you make your artwork better. I could do even better with this if I wanted to make it, like a vector layer, but I like my raster graphics. I'm fine with it. I do use vector for other things, when I do actual logo designs and stuff like that. That's great. Artwork is a little different. I don't mind the pixels. I'm fine with them. So as we're doing the inking, I'm trying to remember to vary my ink strokes. So on the outside parts of the artwork, I use a little thicker line. As I go into details, I make sure to lower my brush size and get a smaller line. That difference in line strokes creates a real dynamic feel, and it really comes out, especially when you start the coloring process, which is, to be honest, is one of my least favorites. I really like the concepting, I like the inking, but when it comes to coloring, I'm not exactly great. I mean, I'm okay, I have a style that I stick to, but as far as like really enjoying it, not necessarily. I love the way it looks once it's done. I guess that's something. So here you go, I'm detailing out her bracers here. So I'm pulling the sketch away and kind of see how clean that looks. Adding these hand-drawn lines with varying thicknesses, it gives it a personal feel. And I think that's what's missing in a lot of artwork today. You go out, especially on something like Pinterest or some other art sharing site, DeviantArt, whatever, and you see a lot, and I do mean a lot, of AI generated work. And it all starts looking the same. I'm a little old school when it comes to this. I believe that as an artist, you should take the time to learn how to do the art yourself. Use the tools available to you to make yourself better. But put some skin in the game. Go and do your own work. If you want to have a software program output artwork for you based on a text prompt, I mean, fine, go ahead, but don't call it artwork because you didn't do it. You might have told it what to do, but you didn't do it. It's like having the jock come up to the nerd in school and either pay him or make him write your essay for you. Yeah, you told him kind of what to do and took credit for it, but you didn't actually do it. So I'm over here adding some shade lines to give me some idea on what to do during the coloring. I'm starting to work on the winch belt here. Got to make sure we have some squishiness in here because the belt's it's pulled kind of tight, so it's meant to add that hourglass female form, just not nearly as much as say a corset, but it's definitely meant to cinch the waist, so you want to reflect that in the clothing and the skin. That you want to see the folds, you want to see kind of little skin bulges that pop out because they're going to be there. And this is just stuff that you learn over time. So an inking trick that I picked up years ago was I do my sketching and I get the overall idea of what I want. But when I'm actually inking the final work, it might be days after I initially drew it. So I go back and I use the sketch as a guideline, and then I start really making my definition in the ink. And that's just because it's just like so I don't waste time. I could sit there and on the sketch make all these little minute details, but it doesn't matter because I'm gonna have to go back and do it again when I ink the work. So it's just a process that I've learned over time to kind of help me out. If you're struggling or if you're learning how to do this, then I highly encourage you to be as detailed as possible as your comfort level allows, so that when you go back and you do some final work, maybe you don't ink, some people don't, but when you go back and you polish it up, then you have that reference that you need. It's quite all right. So I've been drawing in this style for a very long time. Not to give away my age completely, but I've been doing this since probably the mid-90s. And I strive to get better and better and better. And I'll actually credit using references to help me with that. Don't think that you have to create artwork from memory. You just don't. You can if you want to. I mean, and I guess that's the ultimate goal. But if you want to keep trying something different and go something new, use references. They could be photos, they could be AI, it could be whatever. Whatever inspires you. Use those references. And that's actually one thing that I can credit AI with doing for me, is it allows me to get ideas and concepts without having to search for a really long time. Used to, it took me a long time to just go out and look around at photos or take my own photos. And now, especially with social media and everything else, it knows what I'm looking for, what I'm liking, so it just adds this kind of stuff to the feed, and I'm like, oh, that's cool. That's a cool reference, yeah. I dig that. Cameo by the Puppy Dogs. Okay, as you can see here, I'm going back after my initial ink sketch. I just didn't like the way it looked, hand done. I wanted it a little bit more, a little more organic, I guess. And so now I'm going back and using the Bezier tool, adding some line thickness around the edge. That's a comment that I mentioned earlier, that it just makes it look a little bit more dynamic, a little more interesting. And to be completely honest, drawing liquid is not easy. It's something I don't do very often. So this is, as you can kind of see, it's kind of a new thing for me. Okay, the inking is just about done. I'm cleaning it up here. There it is. Now it's time for base color. Here we go. So this is where I'll go in, and I have a process, and you can probably see it over in the left-hand layer panel, where I have a block color that I go in, and I'll either do different sections or I'll do a particular character all in a block color, and then I'll use a clipping mask to draw over that. That way I can kind of go outside the lines, and it's a little bit more forgiving. But as you can see here, I'm definitely trying to stay within the lines just so that there's no funky color at the end. But it works. It works pretty well. So I do have a palette that I work off of, especially when I'm doing artwork for specific characters. And so this is a character that I've had for a long time. I went back and I did some character work for her a while back. And during that time period, I went ahead and saved all of my colors into a color palette that I use for each piece of artwork. And so this is Adri, so she's blonde-headed and she has pink in her hair. And so I have references that I use to keep that consistent. And at this point, the references are other pieces of artwork that I've done of her. And I'm using this brown color on these bracers. I want to kind of keep it this whole tavern-made feel, beer-made, tavern-made. So I'm going kind of bright and fun with the colors, but some of the things like the bracers and the winch belt, I want to keep these neutral-ish, brownish earthy tones just so that she's grounded to a particular world. I like to add a little bit of gold to brown. I think it looks pretty good. It adds a little bit of highlight, some interest. I have a habit of naming my layers. I like to know what's what. See, that was my reference there. You might have seen it. And so I'm using her as this reference for her pink in the bottom part of her hair. So I'm just going over it with an airbrush at this point to get the basic color, and then I'll go back over the eraser and get the parts that, outside on the bleed. It takes a decent amount of cleaning when you're using an airbrush because of the overspray. Starting to add some details. Pink nails. Accent her hair. So we're gonna do pink laces too. I thought that was kind of an interesting idea. I'm like, why not? Accessorize. So she's starting to look pretty cute. Got this blue dress on. I really like it. Blue with the brown. It looks classy. So now we're starting to do the handle, the glass, and start doing the beer. So I'm doing the glass base color first, and then I'm going to add beer on top of it. Just kind of some trial and error. I'm a dark beer ale fan, so I'm going with this kind of medium brown base color, and then I didn't like it, so I'm going a little darker. So that's a little bit more like it. Let's go brown ale on this. Okay, as we move into our next phase of the coloring, you can kind of see that I'm going in and making some little details and filling in some gaps, but we're going to go into color shading. So typically, I do like a cell style. I like using kind of blocky, obvious shade sections, especially for my different levels of shading. I'll blend from time to time, like I'll go in and I'll use a blend tool, or I'll go in and kind of fade in the colors when I deem it necessary, but I really like the hard lines that show up when you do shading like this. And I just think it's more interesting, it's more dynamic. It's just a personal preference. Everybody has their own. So as you can see here, I'm adding a multiply layer on top of the skin layer. And it's a little darker than what I was working with, but with the multiply, you can, it takes the color underneath it and adds the color that you're applying. And so you create this nice shade effect. And if you do it on a different layer, then you can go in and you can modify that layer at any time. Now, depending upon your art style and how much of a purist you are and your personal preferences, etc., you'll get varying opinions on how to do the actual shading, where to position your light, etc. When it comes to characters and fun, I like to just get a general idea on where a light source would be, and then create my shading based on that. Sometimes the shading doesn't work out the way I want it to, so I might fudge that and modify it a little bit to fit my needs. But for the most part, I tend to have my light source in a specific spot. And most of my artwork, the light source is in the top left. Not always, but sometimes. It also depends on the context of artwork I'm working in. If I'm creating a graphic novel, say for instance, I have to be diligent and remember where a particular light source is coming from because it affects the mood of the scene. That's different. There's multiple images there working with each other to create a story. When it's a one-off picture, it really doesn't matter. The light source could literally be anywhere. Unless, of course, you're creating a specific art piece that shows off a particular mood or whatever the case may be. But in this case, you can kind of see that for the most part, the light source is coming down from the top left. Some of the shading is created from other things, such as her hair. Her hair going over her head is going to create a shadow underneath it. You know, in reality, it probably wouldn't be as strong as it is on her right side, or our right side, viewer right side. And there's going to be varying depths of shade, which is fine. You know, if you really want to get into it, great. It's not my particular style, but I'm not going to stop anybody from exploring realism if that's your stick of butter. As you work on your shading, don't forget to think about how objects in your scene are going to be affected by other objects. So in this case, I'm adding some shading on her dress, her barmaid outfit, whatever you want to call it, you know, where her hair would come down. It's going to create a shade underneath it. I'm working right now on the light coming from the top left with this the enormous size of her bust is going to create some type of shading underneath it, so I'm blocking that out. And as the folds in her outfit kind of overlap, there's going to be parts where highlights are going to occur, and it's not going to be shading 100% of it. There might be ambient light bouncing off something else to create some kind of dynamic look, and that's what I'm doing here. The little attention to detail, like little shading areas where her little knot, her little bow is gonna create. You know, there's gonna be shadows there. That's attention to detail. That's stuff that people might not notice, but as an artist, you should be able to notice it, and it just makes your artwork that much better. So as you can see, this process does take time. And just because you feel like you're in this stage of work doesn't necessarily mean you have to just keep doing and shading absolutely everything. You don't have to. Just as long as you're creating that dynamic feel in the image and that's coming across, that's really all you need. It depends on how realistic that you want to be with your piece. In this particular case, I wanted to keep the anime cartoony feel, and so I'm doing very basic shading, and I like this kind of shading. I think it looks interesting. I think it fits the artwork style. It fits my personal style, so it just works. Okay, I'm over here finishing up a little bit of the blocking, major blocking areas, and now we're going to get into the secondary shading, where we know where the basic shades are going to come in, but now this is getting a little bit more detailed. You know, the shading in her hair is going to be a little different because we've got like a two-tone hair system going on, and now I'm starting to get into more of the details, such as her winch belt, and I'm going to start shading in her laces and things that are just going to be, you know, a little different than her main outfit. And as you can see here, as I'm going around this yellow gold trim around her accessories, her bracers and her winch belt, by adding a shade to it, it adds dimension. And just keep in mind that anytime you add shading to something, you're going to have to add some type of highlights. Those highlights can be obvious or they can be very, very subtle. But it's, you know, once you kind of start going down this path of adding dimension on the dark side, you have to add the light side to balance. You know, we've all seen Star Wars. there are a ton of details in here to shade. As you can see, I'm just now getting to her tongue. I'm gonna have to do some shading on her teeth. You know, there's just so many little things. I haven't even touched the beer yet. There's just so much. And sometimes this can take a long time, and that's okay. You know, take as much time as you need. This was done over several days, I believe. This was back last year in 2024. I did this over the summer. And it takes time. As I was shading this this beer ring around Adri, you know, I had to keep in mind that this is liquid. It's not organic, but it has an organic-like feel to it. You know, water's formless unless given a form. So in this case, I had to remember that the mass that it has should be round and bubbly and no harsh edges. It's all volume. You know, it's all this liquid form here with a bunch of tubes and hoops and circles and all that. So this is a relatively new thing for me in drawing liquid. I tend to not draw liquid. I like to stick with just characters. You know, I have the same problem with landscapes and doing environments. I'm relatively bad at it. Learning. But doing this kind of stuff, you know, you can look at references on how liquid performs when you launch it out of a cup at slow speeds or something. You can definitely do that, and it'll give you an idea on what it would look like. But this is mostly just imagination and what I would think the shading of a liquid would look like. as I'm working on the liquid, which is the largest part of this particular section, we're going to get into the other part of this, which is working on highlights. Now, highlights are important, and highlights, there's multiple kinds of highlights. So a lot of times what I'll do is I'll start blocking off these highlights in different kinds of ways. Depending on my style and what I'm kind of going for at the time, I might do subtle highlights using like a airbrush, so I get that nice spread. And then other times I'll keep with the same feel and do these harsh highlights where it looks like that there's an obvious light source hitting everything shiny. Like everything is shiny, and that's kind of how I feel about the hair. I think the hair is fun, and I see it as a very shiny part of a character. But not everything is gonna be super shiny. It just won't. And so you'll see me jump between doing hard lines and blurring those lines and using an airbrush in certain areas, like say for instance blush. I'll probably use an airbrush here for blush. And if I need to create any kind of subtle changes between highlight and regular color, I'll probably use an airbrush there as well. But as you can see, like especially with that bracer, you start adding the highlight and it starts giving it some serious life. Same thing for the gold on the bracers, for the skin. You can definitely see that the skin is already light, but as you add highlights to it, it just gives it that much more dimension. You really see it in the laces. And then as I'm working on her barmaid outfit, you know, the highlights really start adding a little bit more depth to it. And I really don't have an order, I guess. I take that back. I like to do different sections at a time. So if I'm working on the dress, then I'll stick to the dress. I'll stay with it. If I'm working on her face, you know, I usually stick to her face, and then when that's done, I'll move on to something else. Sometimes I'll jump around depending on what my mood is, but that's generally the idea. So within the software, I like to do my highlights on an overlay layer. Sometimes screen, but usually overlay. I like being able to see the color underneath, kind of bleed through the color that I'm using for the highlights, for the overlay. And as you can see in this part, because the liquid is just so large that I'm using these big blocks here for highlighting. And normally I would go back and add specific specular highlights inside the highlight sections here. So that's just another thing to do. I could do that on this particular layer, or I could make a specular layer, but it all depends on how much you really want to do. In this case, all I'm looking for is to give it form. That's it. Okay, and like that, we're gonna add some final touches to it. And this is where I'm grabbing my airbrush, and I'm gonna be adding a little bit more to the beard to give it a little bit more, I don't know, transparency, a little bit more, you know, interest, I guess. And so it's adding a little bit of blend to it, so you can kind of see that it's almost coming alive. looks interesting. I really like it. I don't know if it looks like beer or not, but to me it does. She's a really cute character. I think the logo is really cute. It's, I've used it in multiple videos. I've used it in multiple pieces of work. Everything under my fictional brewery, and I do home brewing here at the house, is done using this logo. So it serves a purpose. I really like it. I hope you guys liked it. And stay tuned for the next video. Thanks again for hanging out with me.